Well, it's rainy, it's cold, it's sad, it's depressing outside. Perfect for reviewing this album. Hi everyone, welcome to the Alexa channel. My name is Alex, and this right here is going to be a review of the new Car Seat Headrest album, Twin Fantasy. So Car Seat Headrest is the formerly lo-fi project of Will Toledo. He started it at the age of 18 as an outlet for learning how to record, write, and play music and all of that stuff. And he started out in 2010 by releasing 4 albums under the names 1, 2, 3, and then 4. All of those records, which were released on Bandcamp, are extremely rough and lo-fi and really reflect someone who is trying to learn all of the instruments, how to record, and how to record them with the low-quality recording devices that he had at the time. They're definitely not bad records, because I have listened to them, but they are very amateurish records, and definitely ones that are reflective of the time and the age of Will at the time, and how they came across and how they came to be. When Will released his first title album in 2011, which is called My Back Is Killing Me Baby, he piqued the interest of a lot of the general Bandcamp public, including myself. I was barely 13 years old at the time this record came out, which means that I was just discovering some new types of music. So when I found Bandcamp, it ended up being a site that I could use to find some very obscure things. And at the time, Car Seat Headrest was really making the buzz on that site, so it was one of the first things that I decided to check out. When I listened to My Back Is Killing Me Baby, it struck me as a lot more lo-fi and different than anything that I had been listening to at the time. The closest comparison that I can personally make is Tom Waits, to give you a little bit of a perspective on how different my music tastes had been flowing. And if you know Tom Waits, you know that he's not even close to the sound of this, but that still would be my closest comparison, which means this was one of the most different things that I had heard ever, at the time at least. And it was so different that even though I did find it interesting, it was way too weird and out there for me to really get into and enjoy. So while I did enjoy a couple tracks off of My Back Is Killing Me Baby, after that I really didn't give that much attention to Car Seat Headrest as they continued to release more albums. However, Car Seat Headrest went on to receive more and more acclaim the more albums they put out. In 2011, they put out the album Twin Fantasy, which ended up being hailed by many people as their lo-fi masterpiece. And I know a lot of you are probably very confused by what I've just said, but just stick around. It will all be explained in just a bit. The record was a very raw exploration of the themes that have been found on the last record, but in a much more raw and conceptual manner. People seemed to love it, and while I really didn't listen to it, it got a lot of acclaim. By early 2015, Car Seat Headrest had 12 different records under his belt. Not all of them were albums, some of them were EPs, but some of his EPs were nearly 2 hours long, which is just ridiculous. But by this point in his life, he had received a record deal from Matador Records, and that is when the lo-fi days of the group pretty much ended. Car Seat Headrest ceased to be a lo-fi indie rock band and became just a plain old indie rock band, but not really plain old, because what they were doing was so much more ambitious than a lot of the indie rock that was coming out at the time. I was aware of the record deal that they signed, but I never really checked it out because of my experiences with their music in the past. I just wasn't that interested. And it really wasn't until 2016 that I finally decided to listen to one of their records, the new record at the time, Teens of Denial. That record went on to be one of my favorite records of 2016, and is still today one of my favorite indie rock records of all time. I love that record. The hooks on that record, the instrumentation, the lyrics, oh wow, the lyrics, they were so great. I just love the record, and even though I don't own it on vinyl, I'm still looking out for it, and I can't wait to give it a couple spins when I get it eventually. Needless to say, after they put out that record, I was excited to see what they would do next. In late 2017, after a couple of not really albums suggesting singles, more reactionary singles to things that were happening in the world at the time, Car Seat Headrest released a single called Beach Life and Death, which was a re-recording of one of his songs from 2011's Twin Fantasy, which I mentioned earlier. I hadn't really listened to the original at the time at all, so when I did give this a listen, there wasn't really anything for me to compare it to, and while I did think it was a great song, it really wasn't sticking out to me in the way that things from Teens of Denial were. It didn't strike me as punchy, it didn't strike me as immediate, and it came across as more of just an interesting, ambitious 12-minute song. Yeah, it's 12 minutes long. Considering how much other music I was listening to at the time and trying to process, like the new LCD Sound System album, American Dream, the 3 Saturation albums that Brockhampton had put out, Kendrick Lamar's Damn, Tyler the Creator's Flower Boy, I kind of let Beach Life and Death pass by me after one listen. I thought it was great, but everything else just kind of caught up to me and I let it fade away. It was a little bit later that Car Seat Headrest ended up announcing that they were going to do a full re-recording of Twin Fantasy out February 16th, 2018. And while that wasn't really a surprise considering that Beach Life and Death was released as a single before the album was even announced, myself and the internet were split on that idea. They were split because of the connection that many of them had to the original and the rawness and immediacy of that record. I wasn't really as excited for it as I think I might have been if it was a collection of new tunes because, like I said, I really didn't think I was a fan of anything that Car Seat Headrest was doing back then. And their re-recordings that they had done before this, Teens of Style, which came out right before Teens of Denial, while I thought it was good, I didn't love it. And that was mostly re-recordings of his old stuff. However, when this album was announced, I decided that the best thing I could do would be to listen to the original and just see what I thought of it so I could maybe compare it in this review. Well, I ended up really enjoying it. I'm not sure why I decided just to ignore it at the time, and I'm kind of still kicking myself for not checking it out at the time, but it's a great album. It's filled with so many good songs, and while the lo-fi recording quality does hinder it a little bit, it adds a rawness and emotional quality to it that Teens of Denial, while definitely having qualities of, wasn't as strong. However, I was worried that given the raw emotional intensity that I was feeling while listening to the lo-fi production of the original Twin Fantasy, I was worried that it wouldn't be able to translate over to this re-recording that I am reviewing now. Listening to the 2018 Twin Fantasy for the first time, though, I was shocked by how good I thought it was. So many of the songs that really didn't stand out to me as much on the original stood out to me this time. And while I did think it was super bloated compared to the original, this one is 70 minutes compared to the original's 60 minutes, I did think it was good. I thought it was really good on first listen, but nowhere near Teens of Denial. So at first, I think you could say that I was a bit disappointed. I did think it was way too hard to form an opinion on because of just how dense and long of a record it was, so I definitely decided that it did need quite a few more listens. However, on further listens, basically all of the songs on Twin Fantasy opened up completely to me. And while I may not like it as much as Teens of Denial still, Car Seat Headrest has struck gold yet again, making another extremely standout release in the genre of indie rock, and did that by incorporating amazing melodies, fantastic lyrics, great production that enhances the way that the original was supposed to sound, and updates the sound of the original by including new lyrics, melodies, and ideas that weren't even present on the original. And while I'm going to try not to compare it too much to the original, there are some comparisons that the album itself forces upon the original. Plus, the 10 songs on this record, while it is a 70-minute record, do come together to form a cohesive whole, because they take elements from the other songs on the record, they take lyrics from the other songs, and they mash them all up, they reprise each other. And what it ends up doing is it just makes one of the easiest to listen to in a musical way, one of the most cohesive listening experiences that I have had listening to an album in quite some time. And it's just one of the reasons why I love the album so much. Now, let's get into specifics. To start off, the melodies on this record just completely shine. They are probably the second best part of this album behind the lyrics, but I'll get into those in a bit. Going back to the 12-minute Beach Life and Death, which, like I said, I wasn't that crazy about the first time I heard it, by the third time that I listened to this record, maybe the second time even I listened to this record, this song completely just revealed how great it was to me. The 3 main sections of the song all feature their own amazing melodies. They also feature reprises of themselves. But the thing about the song is that it doesn't matter that it's 12 minutes long because all of the melodies just hit, and they're incredible. There's so much that makes this song great that there's just way too much for me to cover in this review. But I just want to let you know that if you don't listen to any other song on the record, listen to this one, because it is one of Car Seat Headrest's finest moments, and it's one of the best indie songs that I've ever heard, and that's not an exaggeration. It's a fantastic song. I think you should probably check it out, and it justifies all 12 of its minutes. Also, shorter songs like Nervous Young and Humans, My Boy Twin Fantasy, the opening track, Cute Thing, Bodies, Sober to Death. They're shorter songs. Some of them not by that much. Some of them are like 7-8 minutes long, but they are shorter songs, and what they lack in length, they make up for in melodies that are just as catchy as Beach, Life, and Death. And all of those songs are huge highlights on this record. There are some songs that they don't place their focus on being these straightforward, amazing, immediate songs. Songs like the last 3 on the record, High to Death, which is just a brooding, dark, and sad account of like what seems to be about a crumbling relationship. Then there's the absolute 16-minute monolith, Famous Prophets Stars, which, while it does have some very loud and catchy choruses in them, spends most of its time being a very introspective, dark, and quiet piece. It's amazing. And I'd like to mention the emotional closer on the record, Those Boys Twin Fantasy, which parallels the title of the first song on the record. And it actually does a lot of reprising of songs earlier on the record too, in the melodies and ideas of those. But it also takes, interestingly, something from Teens of Style that was also on My Back Is Killing Me Baby, the song Sunburned Shirts. It takes a melody from that song, one of my favorite melodies on the record actually, and incorporates it flawlessly. Also, the way that this song takes those original melodies and slows them down and makes them more relaxing for the closer is just great. When Will Toledo signed the record deal as Car Seat Headrest in 2015, he brought musicians on to play the record, so it wasn't just him by himself anymore, and this album benefits from it in a lot of ways. The guitars are much more prominent, the bass playing is much better than it's been on any record, the drumming is a lot more solid and not relying on loops like his old music used to, and it gives Will Toledo more chances to focus on his vocals and his guitar playing by himself. It also helps make this last half of the album, which maybe didn't stand out as much on the original, stand out because it gives the album a real sense of flow and calming down and changing, and it also seems to reflect the change in the lyrics that happen around the last 3 songs. And with that, I would like to get into the lyrics. This album seems to be a concept album, maybe not a story concept album, but a concept album about a relationship or an event. It seems to be about this romance or relationship and the life that is going around the time that Will Toledo wrote the album when he was 19 originally, and it seems to reflect how he was feeling around then, how the relationship made him feel. It may also be just about a character that Will is singing as, but a lot of the examples that he uses on the song feel way too personal to not be him. It is also important to mention that this record has a huge ongoing LGBT theme throughout it. If this is indeed a romance that Will Toledo is singing about, it seems that this romance that he is speaking about is speaking to another man. As for example, the first song, My Boy Twin Fantasy, talks about not being able to see a boy much, but eventually they're not going to be alone anymore, and it's very specific that it's about a boy. And also, in the song Beach, Life, and Death, to bring that up again, there's a specific part in the lyrics where he says, "It's been a year since we first met, I'm not sure if we're boyfriends yet." This lyrical tone and theme completely enhances the emotional tone of the record, because not only is it a romantic record and a romantically sad record, but it's also a romantically sad record that has a huge gay element to it. And in my opinion, I think that just makes the record even better, because it just makes it stand out in a way that I personally love. And this is why, as much as I love the songs on Twin Fantasy, I have to say that the lyrics on this record are the absolute highlight. There are too many highlights lyrically on this record for me to really go through any of them, because they are all so hard to choose which ones I like the best, because for the most part I think the entire record is just amazing lyrically, but I just want you to know these few things. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but more on the music side, but this album completely pulls itself up cohesively in a lyrical way by referencing lyrics that were being used earlier on the record later on different songs. For example, Stop Smoking, which is a very short 1.5 minute song very early on in the record. Its overall main lyrics and theme and melodies and everything like that end up appearing later on the record in the song High to Death. The repeated refrain of "the ocean washed over your grave, the ocean washed open your grave" on Beach, Life, and Death ends up appearing later in the huge 60-minute song Famous Prophets. And there is just so much more that this record does in that. Like I mentioned earlier, there's even that throwback from Sunburned Shirts all the way dating back to My Back Is Killing Me Baby, and then again on Teens of Style, and then again here, that appeared. on the final song on the record is a lyrical and melodical return to the themes and exact lyrics that were on those records. And the closest comparison that I can make lies in two different, very different groups. The first one would be the Who's Quadrophenia, with the way that there were the four main themes on that record that were reprised throughout the record, and while I don't think it's as laser sharp as that record was, there's definitely seems to be some kind of influence on the original version of Twin Fantasy. The lyric is replaced on this new one, but on one of the songs he mentions wanting John Entwistle's stage presence, and John Entwistle is, or was, the bass player for The Who for the entirety of that band. So obviously he's aware of the band and he's aware of Quadrophenia and all of that. The other person I can think of who did this was Frank Zappa, and with his conceptual continuity being the idea that anything that he recorded or did live could appear on a later record, which is why there would be songs that he would write that would have a melody in them that would appear on an album like 15 years later. And that is probably the comparison that I find closest fits the way that the lyrics and the melodies have this cohesive repetition on Twin Fantasy. Another thing that I would like to applaud Will on lyrically is how specific yet universal he makes his lyrics. There are mentions of specific places, there are mentions of specific events that happened in his life in the lyrics, but the way that he tells them and the way that he uses metaphor and sayings makes them apply to anyone if they look into it enough. He opens the door for anyone who's gone through similar events to the ones that happen on this record. And basically, if you were a teenager at one point, maybe in the last 10 years, you will probably relate to this record really hard and love it. Will just comes off on this album as a very talented guy lyrically, a talented guy musically, and it shows probably here more than even it did on Teens of Denial, even though that record may have been a bit hookier and more enjoyable. I think his talent is shown off the best on this record. Finally, before I get into the negatives, I just want to speak on the instrumentation for a second. The album's a bit too long for me to speak on the instrumentation in every song, but I just want to say that overall, as an album, this album's instrumentation is fantastic. Like I said earlier, he has more than just himself on the record. It's him and everyone else that he recruited, 3 other guys, and they just make the record great. It's probably the best improvement comparing this album to the original. The way that it differentiates its arrangements from the original by incorporating the fact that it is a full band now just comes off nearly immaculately. The guitars sound much more anthemic than they did. The drumming is so much more emotional than it was, and the bass playing is much more prominent in a fantastic way. Whereas the original placed a lot of emphasis on the rawness of the recording and the noise, maybe not intentionally because it was a lo-fi recording, this one places its emphasis on the way that the music sounds as music and not as a noisy, emotional rawness. It retains the rawness a little bit still, but what makes this album great is not the fact that it is raw, but the fact that the lyrics and the instrumentation combine to become such an emotionally enjoyable and developed recording. Also, this new recording quality that shows up here gives a chance for new influences to show up that maybe weren't even on the original. Sure, you have that Weezer power pop reference that there was definitely a lot of on the original, but now you have new influences from newer acts like Arcade Fire, Animal Collective, Interpol, and you also have a lot of influence from older bands like the aforementioned Who, and maybe even not super old, but the old-ish Slint, especially in the spoken word monologues that appear all over the record. Also, the way that the vocal melodies on this record and the vocal harmonies combine together is super Beatles. Just the way that he sings and the way that the levels of the vocals are adjusted gives it this very 60s psychedelia sound to it, which I think he's always been channeling, especially on songs like Sunburned Shirts. But I think that the way that he does it on this one just gives it such a Beatles feel that it's just fantastic. And let's just talk about the negatives super quickly, because the negatives are not major negatives at all. Every song on this record is at least great, so there isn't that much wrong to say about it. But if I really did have to complain, my major complaint would have to be on the length of the record. It is a 70-minute long record, which is a lot, and while I don't think it necessarily is too long, I think several of the songs are a bit too long for their own good. The one that comes up probably the strongest in that weakness for me would be actually kind of a highlight, the song Nervous Young Inhumans. And while it would probably be a huge highlight if the song was just a 3-minute burst of power pop like the single version was, this one tacks on a 2-minute monologue. And while I love what he is saying in this monologue, I think that it drags on and overstays its welcome by just a little bit. I also think that the song Famous Prophets Stars overstays its welcome by a little bit, which is interesting because the original version of this song on the 2011 release was 10 minutes long, and this one is a whopping 16 minutes. It's the 16-minute monolith, as I referred to it as earlier, and it basically adds another 6 minutes of a piano-type outro, and while I think it's a great addition, it is a bit too long for its own good. This song also has a monologue on it, and while that is all well and good, the problem with this one is it's very hard to discern what is being said in the monologue. It's mixed too low, and it's just really weird, and it might have been an intentional choice, but it wasn't a choice that I enjoyed. If I really wanted to nitpick more, I could talk about the fact that not everything on the album is just a perfect album. But those nitpicks are so small, like vocal mixing on one song, or the way an instrument doesn't exactly hit the way that I specifically wanted it to. That's so minuscule that I think that other than the length and the way that occasionally the record is mixed a little bit, I don't have that many other complaints about this record. To wrap this review up, and this is the last time that I'm going to say this exact thing, but this record is currently my album of the year, and yes, once again, I know that it is February, and I'm not going to say this in a video once again, because the last time I said it, the next video, this happened. But this is my album of the year currently. I think it's an incredible album with barely any flaws, and it is also the first album of 2018 that I decided to pick up on vinyl. It's a double vinyl, it's beautiful. I'm not really going to go into detail about it, just know that I have it and it's really good. I can sing so many praises about the album, from the vocals, to the lyrics, to the instrumentation, to the changes that were made from the original, that I can make an album review that is 3 times this long and still not cover everything I want to talk to you about, but I'm just going to not do that because this review is already very, very long, and you already know that I love this record, and I think it is just amazing. I may prefer Teens of Denial a little bit, but this album is more consistent than that record, and while the highs might be higher on Teens of Denial, I still love this record, and maybe one day it will end up growing on me to the point where I do like it more than Teens of Denial. I think that also, even if you don't take the lyrics as a highlight, maybe if you can't relate to it in the way that I can, instrumentally, this is still an album with a lot to chew on that I think anyone could listen to and enjoy. And while it may not be for everyone as like an album that they will love, I recommend that you listen to it anyway because it is a fantastic record. If you want to hear a modern day rock record that is just good and enjoyable, this is probably the record to listen to, and it is for that type of reason that I have no trouble giving this record anywhere in between a high 8 to a low 9 out of 10. Car Seat Headrest's Twin Fantasy is flawed, but it is a flawed masterpiece, and I cannot wait to see what they do next. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this record review. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure that you donate to me on Patreon, like, comment, subscribe, do all of the things that you do. And this time, I really need you guys just to write a comment, something that you want me to review next, because at this point I've basically gotten through everything that I wanted to listen to so far this year, and I'm open to listening to anything else. I just want to hear what you guys want me to review, and I will review it next probably. So with that, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. See ya!